Hello and welcome to My Piano Method with me, Michelle Orp. This is my beginner to grade course, lesson 18. So what we're going to do in today's lesson is to take a really close look at a grade level piece of music. I've picked Minuet in G by Johann Sebastian Bach. Now it's quite a recognisable tune if you listen to classical, but if not, if you just Google Minuet in G, you'll hear lots and lots of different renditions. Now there's been many different ways this has been played and lots of different scores have been written on this. I've created one for you that you should be able to tackle. So we're going to go through it together now, step by step. We'll learn the right hand and left hand this lesson, and then in the next lesson we can put both hands together. So let's get stuck in. So we'll start as we always do and go through this score piece by piece, looking at everything that we can see and making sure we understand it. So this is Minuet in G, and we've got 4 lines of music. Here are the first 3, and here is the last line. So the first thing we look at is the key signature. Now we can see there is a sharp in this piece of music, and this is an F sharp, and I'm hoping that you remember that if there's an F sharp in the key signature, that means it's a G major. Now if you can't remember this, then if you go back to lesson 13, I created this document for you which shows all of the key signatures that you'll need to know. And you can see that the one that has 1 sharp, which is an F sharp, is indeed the G major. Now you can also use your circle of fifths. So we did this in lesson 15, and if you remember, you always count your sharps around to the right, and the C at the top has no sharps or no flats. So if we were to count around to the right, you'd see that the G major has the 1 sharp. Now, of course, it could be its relative minor, which is the E minor. And if you remember, the way we find this out is by going back to the piece of music and having a look at the last note, because composers do tend to end on the root note of the scale. So if we go to the end of Minuet in G, you can see that actually, here you go, there's a G at the end. And actually, there's kind of a pretty big clue in the name, because it's called Minuet in G. But also, at the very start of the music, we do have a G chord as well. So if it wasn't called Minuet in G and we were trying to work out whether it was a G major or an E minor, the fact that it starts with a G major chord and ends on a G would tell us that this piece of music is written in G major. And because we have this F sharp already written in the key signature at the start, we need to remember that every single F in this piece of music will be played as a sharp unless told otherwise. So in these first 3 lines, we've just got these 3 Fs here. So you will have to play all these Fs as an F sharp. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at the time signature. Now this is 3/4. You should remember that this means there are 3 quarter note beats in every bar. Now because we do have some 8th notes in this piece of music, we're going to be counting 1 and 2 and 3 and. And I'll do this with you when we go through our right hand. We'll count it out to make sure that we can get the rhythm right. Okay, so next up we're going to take a look at whether there's any notes that we're unsure of. Are there any notes that are going off the stave that we need to work out? So there are a few actually in this piece. So if we take a closer look at these left-hand chords, here we go, we can see that there's a few notes that do go off the stave. Now hopefully you've remembered that the first ledger line off the top of the bass clef will be the middle C. And if you go back to lesson 4, you've got that handy PDF which shows you all of the notes on the stave. So all you do is when you're trying to work out your left-hand notes is you would start with that middle C and work your way up or down. So if we take a look at that first chord, you have your ledger line, which will be middle C. If we count up, that first note will be D. If we count down, the next note will be B, and the note beneath that will be G. Now if we do this for the other chord, we can see our ledger line there, the first ledger line above the stave. We know that's middle C, and there's a note on that, so that note will be C. If we count up, the note above it will be E, and if we count down, we'll work out that that bottom note is a G. And hopefully you would have noticed something here, that each of these chords are a triad that we know. We have the G major triad first, which is G, B and D, and that's in its root position with the G on the bottom. And we have a C major triad, which is in its second inversion, because it's still a C, E and a G, which is a C major triad, but it's starting on the G, which means it's in its second inversion. So this really helps us when we're playing the piece. We don't really need to read these notes as we play, because we can see that it's a chord. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at articulation. Are there any slurs or ties in this piece? Well, there's no ties, but there are quite a few slurs. So hopefully you've remembered that this means we play these notes legato, which is smoothly. So any notes that come under that slur line will be played legato. And if you remember, the opposite to legato is staccato, which means to play short and sharply. We do have a few of these in this piece. Here we go. So make sure when you come to these notes, you're playing them nice and detached, short and sharp. And we did learn all about these in lesson 9, so do go back to lesson 9 if you can't remember. Okay, next, are there any rests in this piece that we need to be aware of? Well, there are a few, not many, but a few. We have 2 quarter note rests here, and we have a half note rest as well. We learned about these in lesson 6 and what they look like, and remember, when we come across them, we are not playing anything. Okay, next, let's take a look at dynamics. We do have a few dynamics in this piece. We have 3 directions on this first page, and we have some more in the last line as well. And we also have this lovely crescendo here at the end. Now, if you can't remember what you need to do for that crescendo, we did learn about dynamics back in lesson 12, so go back and remind yourself of what all of these directions mean, and of course what those changing dynamics mean as well. But there's just a crescendo in this piece, which means for that bar we'll be gradually getting louder. So there is one more direction on this piece of music that we haven't gone through, and that's this marcato. Now this is basically an accent on the note. We did go through these in lesson 17. So if you take a look at the 5th direction down, that's a marcato. It means strong emphasis on the note, and this is a longer emphasis than an accent. So we're going to be hitting this note slightly harder and holding it for slightly longer. And we also have a repeat sign at the very end of the piece as well. So basically, we're going to be playing this piece twice through. And we learnt about repeat signs back in lesson 16. Okay, so there's only one more thing that we haven't mentioned on this score, and that's the direction at the top. And this is a tempo direction. So it's suggesting that we play this piece moderato. And we did learn all about tempo markings back in lesson 16. And moderato is number 4 on this list, which means to play at a moderate pace. And a moderate pace is around 108 to 120 beats per minute. Now, of course, you won't be playing it that fast yet. You do need to learn the piece of music first, but eventually your target will be somewhere between 108 and 120 beats per minute. Okay, so that's everything on this piece of music, and anything you're not sure of, please do go back to those lessons and refresh your memory. And whenever you start a new piece of music, you do need to do this. You need to look through the whole score, give yourself 5-10 minutes to make sure you understand everything that is expected of you when learning and playing this piece of music. So we're going to go through it now. We're going to start with our right hand and then our left hand, and then we can try both together. So I'm going to take you through this now, showing you how I would count the rhythm and learn a new piece of music. So if we take a look at line 1 first, we'll do the right hand and then the left hand. I'll take away the articulation and dynamics so it's a bit clearer. So here now we can just see the melody nice and clearly. And also we need to remember there is an F sharp in this piece of music. It's in G major. So if we see any Fs, they will be sharpened. So if we take a look at this first note, it's nice and easy because it's just a quarter note. So we'll be holding this down for one and. We then move on to the next two notes, and these are eighth notes. So the G and the A will be played on two and the last two notes in the bar will be played on three and. Moving on to bar two, it's nice and simple because we have three quarter note beats. So the D is one and the two Gs are two and, three and. And then this pattern is repeated for the next two bars. So if I play this while counting it, now that I've gone through it, I can see what I'm doing. The next thing I'd do is play the full line of music while counting out the music. So it would go something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. And you can now start to hear the melody come together, so it gives you an idea of how the song is supposed to sound. So the next thing we take a look at once we've worked out the melody is what else should we be doing when we play this line of music. So we're looking for direction now. So I'd take a look at the dynamics and the articulation and anything extra that's written on the music. So we can see here we have some slurs, which means we'll be playing some of these notes legato, nice and smoothly. And remember, when we're playing slurs, it counts for any notes that are within that line that's written above the music, or sometimes below. So in this case, we'll be playing G all the way up to D, nice and smoothly. So it will sound like this. And we also have some staccato in this piece of music as well. Straight after the D, we have two Gs, and hopefully you've noticed they have that staccato dot underneath them. So both of these notes will be played short and sharp. And this is repeated again in bar 3 and 4. So here we have the slur, the notes are slightly different. We're playing C up to G, and then we come down again for those two staccato notes, G and G. And remember, the dynamic key is mezzo forte, which means we're playing it medium loud. So this first line of music would sound like this. So moving on to line 2, we take a look at the dynamics. There's a little P here, so we'll be playing this piano, which means quietly. There is a slur again, and actually the rhythm here is exactly the same as what we saw at the beginning of line 1. So this is nice and easy to work out. But I would go through, we start on the C, I would count it the same as I did before. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 hopefully you noticed I got a bit louder in these last two bars because the dynamics have changed from P to MF. So we've gone back to medium loud. Moving on to line 3, the rhythm here is exactly the same as line 1, so it should be nice and easy to count through. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. And then we come to our last line of music. Again, the rhythm is pretty much the same. We do have a few more dynamics here. We have the piano at the start, so nice and quiet. Moving up to mezzo forte in bar 2, so we're moving up to a medium loud here. And then notice we have this hairpin at the end. So remember, this is a crescendo, which means for that bar, we are gradually getting louder and we're going from an MF to an F. So it's only a slight difference, but we're going from medium loud to loud. And then we're going to end on that G, in bar number 4. So it sounds like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So there you have it. We've gone through the whole of the right hand. We haven't missed anything. We've done it nice and slowly, and we've counted out that rhythm, and we've taken into account any dynamics and any articulation. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So taking a look at the left hand, we're actually starting on a chord. Now, if you were to count out these notes, you'd see it was a G, a B, and a D. Now, this is a G major triad, and you can probably preempt what this chord is going to be because we're in the key of G major. So it's very likely we'll see a G major chord at the start, or at the very least at the end. Now, there are some rests in this piece as well, so we're going to need to dissect this carefully and make sure we're not playing when we see any rests. So if we're counting out this piece of music, we start off on that chord of G for the 1 and. For the 2 and, we'll be playing absolutely nothing because there's a quarter note rest here. And then for the 3 and, we're on the A. Bar 2, we move to the B for 1 and there's a half note rest there for the rest of the bar, so we're silent for the rest of the bar. Bar 3, we have another chord. This is G, C and E. So this is a C major chord in its second position because we're starting on the G. And then we end it on the B for the full 3 counts. Moving on to line 2, we've moved to piano, so we're playing this nice and quietly, and we're holding down the A for all 3 beats. And then we're going to a G, and then for bar 3, we're going to move up to mezzo forte, so we're going to play this a medium loud now. It's 3 quarter note beats, so nice and easy to count, starting on the D, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now bar 4 of line 2, there's a bit more going on. We've got a slur at the end. We start on the D for 1 and then we've got 8th notes beats. So for this bar, we've actually got an octave of D. We're going from D to D, and then we come back up to the C to run down, ready for the chord at the beginning of line 3, which is a G chord. So you'll probably have to practice this a few times to get this right. You're going D, down to D, up to C, to that G chord. So you could even start halfway through bar 2. So you have D, B, G, D, D, C, B, A, G chord. So you'll just want to go through these 3 bars again and again and again until you've got it, and it will help if you count it out. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and. So just keep going over that nice and slowly until you've got it, and then you can move on. The end of bar 3, there's a rest for the 2 and the 3 and we're on the A. And then we have a B here for 3 beats, then a C for 3 beats, and then we have this same pattern at the end. 1 and 2 and 3 and. So for line 4, we're starting on the A nice and quietly because it's piano. So we're on the A for 1 and, 2 and, F sharp for 3 and then we're moving up to MF, so a bit louder. We're hitting the G for 1 and, 2 2 and, hit the B for 3 and then we've got this little crescendo at the end. So we've got 3 notes, C, D, and then octave D below it. And we're getting louder and louder. So we're going to go C, D, D. And then for that last bar, we're going another octave of G. So we start on G, which has a staccato, so it's short and sharp. And then we end on the G, which has that marcato, so the accent. So we're emphasizing this low note and holding it for a bit longer. So those last 2 bars will sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So you need to practice this left hand nice and slowly, bar by bar, line by line, until you become confident. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So this piece of music is probably going to take you quite a while to master. It's not a quick fix, it's quite difficult. And the speed of it, which is moderato, is actually quite quick for the level you're playing at. It's 108 to 120 beats per minute. You don't have to get there, you can just take it at your own pace. But if you are going to aim for that tempo, then you will need to practice and it will take you some time. We are looking at both hands in lesson 19, but you don't have to do that yet. Visit that practice once you're confident with your right and left hand.